All right, today we're doing a special deep dive into a pretty powerful and, let's be honest, unconventional manuscript called the KAI Protocol. Now, this is not your typical self-help guide full of affirmations. Think of it more like an operating manual, a blueprint for systematically re-architecting your entire reality from the ground up. It's dense, it's definitely challenging, and it kicks off with a direct confrontation.
The protocol opens with that single provocative statement. You are being played. Not by some rival, not by an enemy, but by the 3 pounds of biological hardware sitting inside your skull. See, it's running a survival script that was written for a world that doesn't exist anymore, a script perfected 50,000 years ago on the savannah. And that obsolete code, it's generating pretty much all the friction in your modern life.
So the source of all this friction is what the manuscript calls the meat machine. Your brain. You have to understand it wasn't designed to see the world objectively or to perceive some kind of absolute truth. Nope. It's a prediction engine that evolved for one thing, survival. And to do that, it ruthlessly optimizes for 2 things above everything else, conserving energy and maintaining social status within the tribe. In today's world, that ancient hardware just creates a ton of unnecessary conflict, causing us to fight battles that don't matter over things that aren't even real.
So here is how we're going to break this down today following the protocol's 6-part structure. First, we'll dig into what it means to be a meat machine. Then we'll talk about stripping away the ego, architecting your reality, and operating in the red dust. After that, we'll see how it all applies through the lens of the zero-base architect. And finally, we'll explore the endgame, the final dissolve. Okay, part 1, you are a meat machine. The protocol is super clear on this. If you want to escape a prison, you first need the blueprints of its design, right? Well, in this case, the prison isn't made of steel bars. It's built from your own biology and that comfortable little story you like to call yourself. The manuscript frames your ego as being like a computer's user interface. You know, that feeling of you, your personality, your pride. It's basically just a desktop icon. It's a handy little graphic that hides the trillions of lines of code that are actually running reality underneath. And what do most of us do? We spend all our energy trying to polish that icon, right? Make it look shinier, more confident. The protocol argues that's a massive waste of time. The real work is getting under the hood and rewriting the code. And that constant narrator in your head, the one that never shuts up, neuroscience calls it the default mode network. Its main job is just to maintain that icon, to tell you a story about yourself. And doing that, well, it burns a staggering amount of your energy. And it's not just the hardware that's buggy. The software is too. You are a host for memes. And no, we're not talking about funny pictures with captions. In this context, memes are units of cultural information, ideas, beliefs, behaviors that copy themselves from mind to mind. Things like follow your passion or climb the corporate ladder. These aren't really your thoughts. They're social scripts. They're cultural viruses that got installed in your mind to make you a predictable part of the bigger social machine. They exist for the group's survival, not necessarily for your optimal performance.
And right here, we see the core conflict. Society gives you this pre-packaged map called the path, and it's just loaded with this mimetic malware. It tells you to be loyal, even when it makes no sense. It tells you to fight for fairness, which is a subjective idea that often ignores the cold, hard math of a situation. The KAI protocol says, burn that map. Instead, learn to read the actual terrain, what it calls the requirement. The requirement doesn't care about loyalty. It calculates the value of an exchange. It doesn't debate fairness. It just analyzes the initial conditions of a system. The huge shift is this. You stop asking what society wants from you, and you start asking what the raw physics of the situation demand.
All right, part 2, stripping away the ego. This is the deconstruction phase. This is the surgery. Now that we've found the malware, we gotta remove it. The goal here is to evolve from being an emotional reactor, a puppet being jerked around by the meat machine, to becoming a detached, zero-point observer who just processes data.
And the main surgical tool for this is the mirror principle. Imagine a personal insult is like a projectile fired right at you, a slug of pure heat. For most of us, that slug hits, we absorb the heat, and our internal temperature just skyrockets with anger or shame. The whole system starts to malfunction. A mirror, though, doesn't get hot when light hits it. It just reflects the energy back perfectly. When you adopt this principle, an attack is no longer a personal threat. It's just a data packet telling you everything you need to know about your opponent's internal state, their fears, their desires, what makes them tick. You stay at room temperature, fully operational, while they're the one overheating. The protocol gives you these really practical drills to build this muscle. First, the adjective strip.
You stop telling yourself, my boss was an arrogant jerk. That's a story. Instead, you just state the facts. The project lead allocated 60 hours of tasks into a 40-hour work week. The trauma vanishes, and you're just left with a math problem to solve. Second, the missing credit test. Next time you have a great idea, let someone else say it and take the credit. Feel that sting? That's your ego screaming for validation. Starve it. And third, my favorite, is the idiot cloak. You intentionally let someone win a pointless argument you know you're right about. You trade a meaningless ego victory for a huge strategic one. They now underestimate you, which is the ultimate camouflage.
So with the old programming wiped and the ego sedated, we can move to part 3, architecting reality. Deconstruction is over, now we build. This is where we install the new KI operating system, and we shift from being a passive pawn reacting to the world to an active architect who actually designs it. The core of this new OS is a relentless focus on strong forces over weak forces. Society tells us to rely on weak forces. Just use more willpower, try to build a better culture, get motivated, hope for the best. The manuscript says that's like trying to power a city with a couple of AA batteries. They're finite, they require constant effort. The architect instead focuses on strong forces, the undeniable physics of incentives, the inescapable logic of system architecture, and the hard reality of physical constraints. You don't try harder, you change the physics of the game so that harder isn't even necessary. And this brings us to the central concept of structural inevitability. Think of a marble in a bowl. No matter where you drop it, it's going to end up at the bottom center. The marble doesn't need motivation. The outcome is guaranteed by the structure of its environment. And that is the goal of the architect. Instead of telling people what to do, you redesign the environment around them. You don't yell at water to flow downhill, you just dig the trench. You create a system where the outcome you want becomes their path of least resistance. To do this, you have to understand the physics of people. You have to stop moralizing human behavior. People aren't good or evil. They're biological algorithms running a very predictable script, optimized for status, security, and dopamine. So an apparent betrayal? It isn't a moral failing. It's a simple physics calculation where someone else exerted a stronger incentive gravity on them than you did. So stop asking for loyalty. That's a weak emotional variable. Start architecting incentives. That's a strong mathematical constant. And gravity always wins. So having architected our internal world, part 4 is all about the external, operating in the red dust. This is the manuscript's term for the messy, chaotic, high-friction world of everyday society. The goal here is to move through this world and achieve your objectives without setting off its very sensitive immune system. Now, the guiding principle for operating in the red dust is deeply counterintuitive. Our culture celebrates being visible, having a brand, getting recognition. But from a purely strategic point of view, visibility is a liability. If you seem brilliant, you trigger envy. If you look powerful, you become a target. According to the protocol, true power means being utterly unremarkable. Visibility creates friction. Invisibility creates total operational freedom. You can't hit a target you can't see. A key tactic for becoming invisible is matching dialects. You stop having one rigid personality. Instead, you become like a linguistic chameleon, matching the frequency your target is tuned to receive. When you're talking to a CEO, your dialect is all about efficiency and the bottom line. You become the safe pair of hands. With a frontline worker, you speak the language of fairness and respect. You become the straight shooter. This isn't about being fake. It's about becoming a superconductor for information, removing the static from the line so your message is received with zero friction. And this all feeds into the bigger picture, the water strategy. Water never attacks a rock head-on. That's a foolish waste of energy. It just flows around it patiently until the rock is either worn down or the main path of the river has just shifted so far away that the rock is left high and dry, totally irrelevant. In the same way, the KIA operator avoids direct fights. Instead of trying to destroy an obstacle, you engineer a new path that just makes it obsolete. This is a core tactic of the water strategy. Yield the form, but secure the substance. Let other people, driven by their egos, win all the battles for form, the fancy titles, the public credit, the satisfaction of winning the argument. These are low-value shadow assets that just feed the meat machine. While they're busy celebrating, you quietly secure the substance, the majority voting rights, the final decision-making power, the ownership of the revenue. Let them have the shadow, you keep the reality. Part 5. This is where the rubber really meets the road. The protocol stress tests its own ideas against a scenario that our society considers a total catastrophe. You're 40 years old, you're broke, and you have no job.
This is the ultimate test. Now, anyone following the path would see this situation as a complete tragedy, a public humiliation, but the architect sees it as a position of supreme strategic advantage. Why? Because you have 40 years of accumulated data, which means you have high-level pattern recognition, and being broke with no job means you have zero assets to defend, zero legacy systems to maintain, zero political capital to protect. You have low baggage. You are, in a word, weightless. And in this world, being weightless means you can move at maximum speed. The power in this scenario really boils down to a single number. The protocol argues that most of our personal spending is a status tax, money spent not on function, but on signaling our rank to the tribe. By ruthlessly stripping away every single status-driven expense, you can drop your actual survival requirement to a stark number like this. Lowering your burn rate is the absolute fastest way to buy freedom. A person who only needs $1,500 a month to live has near infinite leverage. They can say no, they can walk away. They are freer than a person making 10 times as much, but trapped by a high-status lifestyle. And this radical shift in needs leads to a completely different daily life, a different protocol. The standard person's day is reactive. They wake up to emails and news, a cycle of alarm. Their work is a direct trade, time for money. Their spending is driven by dopamine hits, and their social life is just a quest for ego validation. The architect's day is a quiet architecture of efficiency. The morning starts with internal silence, deactivating that chattering narrator. Work isn't about selling hours, it's about building automated systems, bridges for flow. Spending is for functional maintenance only, and social interaction becomes pure data collection. So how does this solo architect even make money? Not by getting a job. A job is selling your time. It's the least efficient model. Instead, they practice systemic arbitrage. They learn to see the economy not as a job market, but as a huge collection of interconnected and often inefficient systems. They hunt for the leaks, the friction points, the information gaps, and then they build an invisible bridge, a piece of code, a unique connection that solves that one specific leak. They aren't selling their time. They're selling the function of the bridge, which works whether they're there or not. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most profound section. Part 6, the final dissolve. This is the end game of the protocol. After you've mastered the internal and external worlds, the goal is not just to be a better player in the game. The ultimate goal is to become a fundamental rule of the game itself. To get to this state, the protocol lays out a 30-day firmware update, a boot camp to overwrite your default programming. Week 1 is a strict ego fast, starving your vanity by practicing anonymity. Week 2 is tactical realism, where you relentlessly hunt down every should and fairness statement in your head and translate them into neutral conditions. Week 3 is systemic engineering, where you actually build one small system that alters incentive gravity. And finally, Week 4 is merging with the dust, where you achieve a real objective while staying completely invisible and giving away all the credit. This reveals the final paradox of the entire system. Society teaches us that impact requires visibility. The protocol says the exact opposite. If people know you were the one who changed things, you are still just an agent, a person, a visible target. You're a level 3 operator. But if the system shifts and people believe it was just a natural evolution, that it just happened by itself, then you've achieved the highest level of operation. You've become the architect. See, ultimately the goal isn't recognition. It isn't for people to admire your brilliant design. The end game is to create systems so perfectly aligned with reality that they just seem like laws of nature. When people look at the structure you've built and can't even imagine it being any other way, when the result feels completely, deeply inevitable, that is mastery. And so the protocol leaves us with one final, unavoidable question. After dismantling the self, stripping away the malware, and learning the physics of reality, you've got a choice. Are you going to continue being a character on the stage, a subject in a script written by biology and society? Or are you ready to climb up into the rafters, step away from the spotlight, and start pulling the strings yourself?